This episode of Born to Climb, I sit down with executive coach Darren Kanthal to talk about the biggest challenges that leaders are facing today, from building a vision to handling conflict and even understanding their emotions. Darren opens up about his own journey from being, as he puts it, an aggressive HR leader to helping executives find their voice and lead with authenticity. And we discuss how insecurity drives ego, why hard times are essential for growth, and how understanding this one thing about you can absolutely transform your leadership. So, if you're ready to break out of old patterns and lead with more purpose and courage, this is an episode that you don't want to miss. Tune in. Hey, Darren, welcome to the show. So great to have you here.
Thank you, James.
So, as an executive coach, my first question for you is, right now, what is the most pressing thing, most pressing worry that's on executives' minds?
Man, that's a big question, huh?
For sure.
For the clients I'm working with, personally, for them as the leader, the themes I'm hearing is establishing a vision and holding themselves and their teams to it. So part of it is, how do you create a vision? What is my vision? Do I need a vision? How do I keep it consistent and forefront in everybody's mind? So that vision creation is a big one. Another one is conflict resolution, which I know is age old as corporations are, but a lot of folks, leaders, execs, workers, mid-level leaders, etc., seem adverse to handling conflict. Some are simply conflict adverse. Some say they don't know how. Some people feel like they're going to get into a fight, and so it's better just to avoid it. So all that to say is that they're not very well equipped to have meaningful discourse. And then the third thing is maybe more for me, my upbringing, applying it also to leaders, is I don't think we do a great job of identifying how we're doing, i.e. how we feel. Yes, I'm talking emotions. What are the responses based upon those emotions? Like for me, I default to anger, irritation, annoyance. And when I do, I get very pointed, aggressive, loud, I curse. I'm not patient, I'm not open, I'm fixed mindset. And those traits are not very cooperative or helpful in most instances. So it's that whole emotional well-being that I think is also underlying with a lot of challenges we see.
So what's interesting is, a lot of the things you said there are, in a sense, those fundamental skills, right? Having a vision, dealing with people, conflict resolution. But even though there is a skill to those, and there's frameworks that people can follow to get better, at the end of the day, though, it's something on the inside that is holding people back. Do you find that as well? And if so, what is that?
Yes, I do find it, 100%. My theory is that we, as humans, are protecting insecurity, right? So I'll be personal. I won't talk about anybody else. For a lot of my earlier adulthood, up until literally 5 years ago, 2020, so 4 years ago, my insecurity was all around, I'm not good enough. And I think I knew it, but it wasn't so conscious in my brain. So that was the insecurity I was protecting. I had to show you that I was worthy, that I was smart enough, that I should be included, that I'm likable, I'm respectable, I'm lovable, I'm all these things. And anytime someone or something started to breach the armor, I got offensive. I went on the attack, I defended myself, everything to push you away from the insecurity. Now, I don't know that everybody's insecurity is as deep as mine, and for some, I'm sure it's deeper. But I think a lot of folks are protecting the ego. Not that they're egotistical, but they're protecting themselves, and that's when offensive or defensive behavior starts to show itself.
Before I talk and ask you some more questions about executives, let's just rewind a moment. How did you get to what you're doing now as a coach of executives?
I'm a former HR guy, and my Achilles heel throughout my career was multifaceted and often in partnership. One was I often had leaders I didn't respect. And then when I had those leaders, I call it my New York, which is aggression, pointedness, arrogance, directedness came out. So you're a poor leader, in my opinion. And I'm, in essence, going to tell you why you, the leader, suck and why I am right and why you should bow down and let me do what I'm going to do. So that was my flow for a lot of years. My longest tenured career, or my longest tenured corporate job was 3 years. And in that wave of 3 years, usually it was 0 to 6 months, I was doing my best to earn the benefit of the doubt. Then when I had it, I'd kind of fuck around, take advantage, to be quite honest with you. Then I'd have these New York behaviors show themselves. And almost always, either you would show me the door or I would show myself the door. And so I had this wash, rinse, repeat. In 2000 and I think it's 17, I got hired by this woman, Cammie, beautiful woman, great boss, top 3 boss, still a friend of mine today, and had a great experience as the leader of recruiting for this company. And as cliche as the story is, new leadership comes in. Cammie and new leadership are not in eye to eye. And Cammie had been there like 12 or 15 years. Her blueprint was everywhere. So Cammie negotiates her exit. I won't use names, but in comes the next crony who was hands down the worst leader of my entire career.
Oh, no.
So I decided to hire a coach. And I tell my coach, her name is Christy, I got to figure out how to play nicer in these corporate sandboxes. Like, I can't keep doing this. And her words are crystallized in my brain. She said, maybe you should change the sandbox. I was like, what? And really what that meant was leave corporate America. And it wasn't just a snap of a finger. It took about 3 months for the idea to come to fruition and get some stuff in order, yada, yada. So that was instrumental to lead me to today. Also, being an HR guy, professional development, hiring and termination, performance management, succession planning, learning and development, like all of these things are part of my corporate DNA, which, who knew, almost 20 years of corporate experience was the real world training ground that I think helps me be a good coach today.
It's interesting, your background and the fact that you were able to recognize that, what I call loop, right? The loop that you were doing every 3 years. And of course, that's another big discussion in itself. I'm not sure if you find this, but I get a chance to work with a lot of amazing leaders, a lot of amazing executives, but also from time to time, I'll work with somebody and after a few times, I'm just like, how are you even this successful? Like, how did you get to running this company or owning this company? Or it's just amazing, but obviously it happens. So because you came from HR and a lot of my HR friends, they feel sometimes frustrated, right? Because on one way, they see the company in a way that sometimes the executives don't see it. They feel very protective, and at the same time, they're trying to be that voice for the employee. And obviously, that puts you in the firing range at times. Did you ever find that in your time at HR?
That we in HR were in the firing range or the firing lane?
Yeah.
Yes, often. You know, for a long time, there was the discussion of HR needs a seat at the table. Like that was the push for HR. And that was before my time in HR. And I think the evolution from personnel to human resources. The interesting thing is that my experience in HR, it wasn't always that we were the bad guys or that we were in the firing lane per se, but it seemed like when times were good, it was, we are the voice of the employee. What does the employee need? And a lot of HR people, at least in my circles, we believe in professional development and benefits and well-being and fairness and equity and all these things. And when there's good times, i.e. revenues are high and there's some excess dollars that we invest. And on the flip side is when times are tough, it seems like the first things that get cut are the very advancements that we were providing to employees. And then the further story to me is one of my, maybe hands down, my least favorite corporate jargony speak is when leaders say, our employees are our most valued asset. Number one, objectifying us as assets is one story, right? But it's also bullshit because the number one asset is the services and the products the company offers. And number two are clients, mostly in my experience. And number three are the employees. And then when times are tough, we go bottom up, right? Employees get affected first. I don't know that clients and services and products really do. So it's just fascinating to me that companies and employees look to HR to be the advocate. When we are the advocate, we're the best friend, right? When the company decides otherwise, and it's often not HR is on the firing squad, right? You guys took this away. HR is this, HR is that.
Yeah, it can be challenging for sure. I want to ask you about your work as you're coaching executives and what role does difficult times play in someone's growth and development? And really, maybe another way to phrase that question is, can we be our best without hard times?
Man, good question, James. When I first started my coaching business in 2019, there was a lot of talk about find your niche, what's your value prop, right? With a million different executive coaches, what makes you different? And I remember someone asked me that question, sitting at a coffee, and immediately my body temperature rose because I didn't have answers, and I felt embarrassed, and I thought, what kind of business owner am I that I can't even answer these questions? The point in sharing that is what this person imparted on me was the value prop is this. Take up all of your failures, package them, and that's your value prop because you lived through those hard times. We learn great things from successes, and I think we learn even more from failures or missteps or mistakes or when things don't go ideally or whatever you want to call it. Said another way, we have to work through hardships to persevere, be resilient, have grit. For those people, and I don't know that I know a lot of them, that have very few, if any, hardships, seem very soft to me, right? Almost like a leaf in a river that has no control over which way it's going to go. So yes, my belief is we've got to live through some hardships and heartbreaks and hard times and failures and getting our ass kicked literally and figuratively to really grow, learn some valuable lessons that then we apply throughout life. And I have to say too, I'm going to be 49 years old this year, and I only share that for a timestamp in that my younger self didn't believe in this stuff. My younger self felt more, I don't know, I don't know what I felt. When I was younger, I just felt like everything was going to work out. I'd do whatever the hell I was going to do. If you didn't like it, too bad. I'll figure it out. And now what I hope the wiser person in me says, no, you've got to play the game a little better. You got to be a little more savvy. You got to be more courteous. There is a level of respect that people deserve. You got to learn from these hardships. Even when you want to stay in bed all day, get up, go do the thing. So perseverance, resilience, grit, all those things are essential.
I heard Alex Hormozy saying on a video recently, he said, think about the kind of person you want to be in the future and what are those characteristics, and then ask yourself what has to happen for those characteristics to take place. And, I'm paraphrasing him, but he said, pretty much it's hard times that will shape everything that becomes good in you. Like if you're going to be a patient person, then you're going to have to go through some struggles to become patient. And I thought that was really insightful. What would you say to someone who is maybe just going along in their career, things are fine, but at the same time, they also feel like something's missing. And if they look around and they're honest, life's not that difficult for them, right? They got a good job, they pay the bills. How could that person inject some difficulty or discomfort in their life? And why would they even do that in the first place?
I think the barometer or the line or the gauge is the fine line between being content and being complacent. And I think that question is often hard to answer and is extraordinarily telling. I think in our society here in the US, there seems to be this insatiable need to find better, the grass is greener elsewhere, maybe this is not as good as it can be. And I think that's where contentment and complacency come into play. If we're content, to me, that means that we're adequately challenged. In the workplace, we're fairly compensated. We generally like our work. We're surrounded with people that uplift us, that kind of stuff. If we're complacent, we're mailing it in. We don't really care that much. We're trying to skirt the system. We're half-assing, we're quiet quitting, we're doing that stuff. So for me, at least, and I've coached people through this, is figuring out where do we fall in that line. Now, I think your question in my brain leans more to those that are complacent and what do they do? Well, I mean, it comes back to well, it doesn't come back to, but it comes to, do you want to challenge yourself, right? Some people are perfectly happy being complacent, and skirting the system is the game for them that they want to play. Now, that's not on the up and up in my world. That's not what I want to do, but to each their own, right? So for me is those that are willing to grow, to look at themselves with an objective eye, to be critical of themselves, not in a negative way, but to be constructively critical of themselves, and then lean into that to grow, to find places of discomfort, etc. Like, those are the people that I like to work with, that I find interesting. They're the ones that will seek out these growth-oriented avenues. In the workplace, it could be asking for different work at work. It could be raising your hand for promotion. It could be looking to leave the job. It could be looking into entrepreneurship. But ultimately, it's doing something different. That's not well, obviously the different is not the same, but doing something different that is challenging enough to break the complacency.
Well, speaking of challenging things, what's one of the most difficult things you ever had to go through?
My dad passed away in 97. Yeah, I was 2 months away from being 22, so I was 21. My dad died the day after my sister's birthday. Some in the spiritual world wonder if my dad waited. Who knows? But, my dad was a faulted man, as we all are, and I loved him. And he was my guy. He was my dad. We were friends. He's the first guy I called with a lot of different aspects of life. When I got in trouble, when I had successes, he was the only man I would listen to. Still to this day, really. Like, there's no one that's really replaced, not a dad, but no one that's replaced an adult male figure that I respect enough to learn lessons from. So the act of him dying and healing from that was the hardest thing. And here I am, I don't know what the math is, almost 30 years later, and I still don't have a male, not a role model per se, but a male father figure that I look to for advice and guidance and, as the old man imparting some wisdom onto me. Like, I don't have that. That's been the hardest thing.
Dr. James Hollis, who we had on the show, is a Jungian psychoanalyst, wrote many, many books, but he talks about when a man loses his father, it's this moment where suddenly you lose the person who you believe had all the answers, and it creates this need to grow up and mature to a level more than you would have if you had still had your father. But I'm sorry about that loss, especially as you were so young. How have hard times shaped you to help you with the executives that you now coach?
The first thing that came to mind was a dad story, which was when I was younger and I'd say, "Dad, what does this mean?" He would answer, "Go look it up." Right? I grew up in the era of encyclopedias, of which we had some. Now, on the sidebar, I don't think he knew the answer, which is why he said, "Look it up in the encyclopedia." But the reason I share that is because both he and my mom both taught me and my brother and my sister, and maybe me the most because I'm the oldest by 5 and 7 years, is this sense of self-reliance and independence. And I don't want to suggest that I don't ask for help or don't believe in help, because I do. But there was this very strong sense of, you are capable, you are smart enough, figure it out. Figure out who can help you, figure out what you can do on your own. You're not helpless, you are not a victim, like, you can succeed. So that's the first thing that comes to mind. that wasn't a hardship, but that was a lesson that's ingrained in me. So when I what's the word I'm looking for? When I encounter victimhood, I struggle. This is not part of my upbringing. Two is I've gotten knocked on my ass a lot of times, mostly because of my mouth. I speak a lot. Often, as a younger man, it was not with respect and courtesy. I've had to apologize so many times. When I was young and in elementary school, my mom made me write apology notes to my teachers, which would be really funny if we still had some of those. Graduating to professional life is I engaged in political battles that there was no way I was going to win, and I didn't care. And then I got knocked on my ass in that sense. I, fought the law and the law won way too many times, which was when I got shown the door a number of times. I've made company-wide errors that affected tens of thousands of people, that my name went across the entire company of a Fortune 100 company. And then I had to put another email out to this Fortune 100 company saying, my bad, I'm sorry. So I've had a number of these stories, and I can expand upon some of them for sure. Some are, far enough back, I probably don't remember the details well enough, but my career is littered with me behaving or misbehaving, having an adverse response to that misbehavior, having to rectify it in some way, often eating crow, apologizing, taking accountability, reluctantly or otherwise, and then living through it. It makes me think of some of the, I am a sports guy, and I'm not like the most knowledgeable or historic sports guy, but it makes me think of Barry Bonds and Roger Clemens, two of the greatest by statistics of all time, neither of which are in the Hall of Fame because they will not admit that they used steroids, which I believe they did. And it's a classic example of not owning your stuff. And so these men will most likely, well, I shouldn't say that way. I don't know if they will or not. But I guess the point of me sharing that is when you err, own it, apologize, learn from it, which comes back to a lot of the things we're talking here, the resilience, the growth from negative experience or failure. For me, it was one of the tipping points was I got tired of saying I'm sorry. And what that meant to me is the reason I had to say I'm sorry is because I was the cause of the offensive act that required the apology. So if I stopped offending, maybe I could stop apologizing as much as I was.
I'm still stuck on the writing apology notes to my teachers. So are those like long notes, or I just picture your mom standing over you?
She was a teacher. An elementary school teacher. So it was the same school that she taught in that I had to write these notes to.
So recently I was speaking at a HR conference in Cape Canaveral, and I was talking about leadership and character. And I asked the audience, I said, how many of you have ever had your boss say sorry and apologize to you? And this was about a room of 150 people, and maybe 3 or 4 hands went up.
Wow.
And I thought, isn't that interesting? This is like the one human relationship where it is so unbalanced because, at least in my world, I apologize to my staff like way more than they apologize to me because it's just, oh, I should have done this. Oh, sorry about that. And not that it's insincere, but it just, I think when leaders are, and let me back up. I wasn't like that when I was younger as a leader. It was just like, hey, protect my ego, protect my image. I need people to listen to me and follow me, and so I don't want to look bad. And so I understand that, but there should be a progression for people through life to be able to gain that ego strength. It reminds me of Jim Collins when he talked about level 5 leaders in his book, Good to Great. It was level 5 or level 6, level 5, but that the best of the best leaders had a mix of a professional will, like they had a vision, they were going after it, but a personal humility, and they were able to be comfortable in who they are. Recently I learned a story about my father that I'd never heard before. And in his early career, he was a geologist, and he was off in the wilderness of Canada with a team that he was leading, and he was in his young 20s. Well, they run out of food And they ran out of food because their boss, before they went on the expedition, said, hey, you got way too much food here, and took some of their food away. So they run out of food in the bush. And my father feeds his crew by fishing every day and catching fish and picking berries for them. And excuse me, and I thought about that because I thought, that was a great leadership moment, but yet my father never read a book. He never took a course on leadership. And I thought, half of being a great leader is just being a good person. And so I wanted to ask you about that. Like when you are helping people become better executives, how much of it is them acquiring some more skills versus just elevating and evolving themselves as a person?
It's less often the skills, for sure. As a sidestep and then to come back, if I may, which is, I don't have a well thought out theory, but I have a start of a theory, which is, I'll just say the old days, and we can take it as whatever that may mean to you and the listener and myself as well, is leadership was more about rank and file. It was, I'm the leader, I'm telling you something, and you go do it. And that seemed to be the world as far as I was taught. Now, more present day, which is maybe the last 30-ish years is maybe the time frame I'd put. It seems like we're evolving from rank and file to more of an open structure, a collaborative structure. The leader certainly sets the pace, but it's not so much I tell you what to do and you go do it without asking questions, which leads to the humanity of leadership. And I would, that's what I would align to the good person that you're saying. Like, yes, I believe that wholeheartedly, and it's the humanity of the individual, the leader themselves. So when you ask the question about, is it skills or is it maybe knowing themselves better, the way I heard it, and it's the latter, it's knowing yourself better. What I find with a vast majority of my clients is the work is getting to the root of what makes them tick. One of the tools I use is values. So what are your top values? What do they mean to you? How do they show up to you? What happens when you don't live up to those values? And what happens if somebody disrespects those values? How do you respond? That's the essence that I've learned or leaned on that helped me help clients see the world as they see it. It's what's important to them. So I started thinking about the inside out, right? The better we know ourselves, the better we know our triggers, the better we know body. And I do this because my physiological response is often in my chest or my jaw. And that's the signal that I'm irritated, I'm annoyed, I'm angry. I could respond emotionally, and that response is going to be knee-jerk and something I probably need to apologize for. But a lot of people seem to be on autopilot or unknowing of why this is a pet peeve, or unknowing that when I behave this way, it shuts people down, and all I want is innovation and brainstorming, and all I get are a bunch of people nodding at me. And the reason they're nodding at me is because I shut their ideas down. Oh, we can't do that. We've always done it this way. It's too much money. And we've, in essence, programmed people not to think openly. So a little bit of a rambling response, I think, but in essence, it is, who are you? What makes you tick? What's important to you? How do you want to show up in the world? Kind of like the story about patience that you said a few minutes ago. How does the patient leader respond? How are you responding? How will you be more patient in the future? What are some experiments you can run to test your patience? And all of those things in time, and it's usually a lot of incremental movements that together lead up to bigger ahas, if you will. But it's really knowing the self more intimately, and then how we show up is what I see as maybe the missing ingredient of the evolution of the leader.
That's a great point about values. I love that. I want to ask you about decisions and risk. And so what would you say to an executive who maybe they're not the CEO, but they're on the senior team, and they are in this place where they know they could just ride it out for the next 10 years. They're in a great position, but at the same time, something doesn't feel right within. There's some sort of purpose that's missing. They think maybe I should do a change, but that's super risky from a financial perspective, but even maybe from an ego perspective, whether they are in touch with that or not. What would you say to an executive who, let's say you're having coffee with, and they explain that situation to you, and they're just not sure what to do?
Yeah. It's the second time you've mentioned like that innate knowing that something is amiss, right? Either I am not living up to my potential or capability, I'm mailing it in, I'm not sure what to do. I could ride out this thing 10 years, but I know within me something is not right, right? There's some innate internal gut knowing. That to me is the clue. And really to oversimplify it is we know best, right? If we think something is amiss, it is. If we think we acted in a way that may have upset you, we did. If we know, that's it. It's done. Like I had a client yesterday tell me that he had gotten some feedback that he wasn't listening to his client. And he said, I have the tendency to speak for 20 minutes. Maybe that's what I did. And I was like, there's no maybe. That is what you did. You know it, right? And because you spoke so much, your client felt like you didn't listen. Like, done. Right? So now what do you want to do with it? Do you want to work on not speaking for 20 minutes or do you want to keep talking for 20 minutes? So even though I don't want to oversimplify it, it is rather simple. Now, the decision may not be, right? It's kind of like that saying, it's simple, but it's not easy, right? We may know something's amiss or we know something is off or it's not right or whatever the signal is. And then the question is, what do you want to do with it? And that's often that is the decisional point. Do you want to mail it in for the next 10 years and live with that feeling? Okay, it's up to you, right? If not, what do you want to do with it? To me, often maybe the less risky move is to socialize or communicate what that feeling is. Maybe it's first with your closest inner circle, friends, family, best friend at work, etc., to like validate it, get used to actually speaking the words, maybe figure out which words are the most inflammatory based upon this feeling, if it is that consequential or instrumental or risky. So it's almost like getting the reps. It's like practicing your speech before game day. And then see what happens. I find that for those of us that have internal narrative or internal dialogue, we talk to ourselves, right? It's a one-sided conversation in which we play all the parts. And the parts we play are often the worst case scenario and the most dramatic and, the rom-com of all time. And then as soon as we invite you into the story, you have a totally different perspective that is not encumbered by my insecurities and all my thoughts. And all of a sudden you say something, you're like, what? Oh, I never even thought about that. And then right there in those moments, often enough, it highlights something we hadn't thought of, which either validates the idea, strengthens it, weakens it, adds an element to it, etc. So it's listening to the inner voice and deciding if you want to do anything with it.
Well, you just brought up the idea of the narratives, the stories that we have. So how important is it for people to get in touch with the narratives that, in a sense, are themes of their life to understand how that's influencing decisions?
It is 100% essential. 100%. I mentioned, go ahead.
No, you go ahead, and then I have a follow-up to that.
Okay. In 2020, just before the pandemic, I got accepted or invited into Shirzad Shemane's first coaching cohort for positive intelligence. And without going into all the throes of positive intelligence, which I love, what it pointed out to me is that my internal narrative, which I just thought was, the narrative of life. I had no reason to think there was anything wrong with my thoughts. It just was my narrative of life. It was so negative. It was all about, I'm going to mess this up. You suck. Of course it went wrong. You were involved with it. You're not good enough for this. Like, who are you kidding? Like, that was the narrative of life. And then through the work of positive intelligence, I learned that, yes, that was my narrative life, but it doesn't need to be that way. And it was that negative cycle that was leading me to all of the turnover and the aggression and the arrogance and the pointedness and all the behaviors that led me to have to apologize. So for me, personally, but also my belief system for others, is we have to know what that narrative is. And if we don't, we got to figure it out, because there's a strong possibility, more of a probability, that is affecting you, how you act, behave, how you see the world, how suspicious we get of people. Right? If my negative narrative is always that you're out to screw me, right? Anything you do, James is out to screw me. Of course he did it that way. There's no positive intent in anything he was doing, which is often not fair or true.
So can you elaborate a little bit on positive intelligence? I think that's a phrase a lot of people are not familiar with.
Yes, I'm happy to. Positive Intelligence is a book. It was created by this gentleman, Shirzad Chamine, and it's its own world and vernacular, if you will. And at its core, it talks about the inner voices that we have. The two competing voices is the judge, which a lot of people, I think, associate as the imposter syndrome. I've heard it as the Achilles heel. I had an old mentor who used to call it as dark angel. But the judge in us speaks in negative fashions. It's guilt, and anger, shame, disappointment, those kinds of negatives. And for me, mine is very overt. It yells at me. It beats me. It's that strong judge voice. Some have more of a covert judge voice, which is a little more whispery, a little more needling. And then the counter to judge is sage. It's our inner best self. It's the essence of who we are meant to be. And the world of positive intelligence has this duality of us. It also has these 9 saboteurs: the controller, stickler, pleaser, hyperachiever, victim, and a few others that I'm forgetting off the top of my head. At its core, we talk about mental fitness. Mental fitness is how often our brain is living in positive compared to negative thoughts. The more mentally fit we are, the more positive our brain is, the stronger our mental muscle is, the more we can overcome the judge's voice. I mean, not that I'm an expert, I'm not suggesting that, but a lot of my work has been when I hear that judgmental voice, am I strong enough to tell it to stop? It's not true. I'm not going to listen to it. I am worthy, right? Like there's this constant battle going on, so to speak, of trying to stay more in this stage voice, which is love and compassion, creativity, empathy, grace, those types of things.
Do you think people can ever finally silence the judge, or is that always going to be with us?
Both. It is always with us. I don't think it ever goes away. And we can quiet it quite a bit. For those in my walk of life, positive intelligence has been the thing that is led to my happiness today. Like it was life-changing for me. It was that impactful. Now, for full disclosure, it's not that impactful for everybody, but for those that it is, it helps us see the duality of the voices. And it's not suggesting we're crazy. It just means we talk to ourselves. So it helps us to see the duality of the voices, and it gives us tools to quiet the judge, louden the sage, and the more mentally fit we are, the more that discrepancy is. If we get triggered by things, hopefully we can recover faster. For me, I could hold a grudge for days, if not weeks. I would dig my heels in, and even though I apologize quite often, they'd be like, no, I'm right, you're wrong, James. I'm not apologizing to you. And nowadays, sure, that happens sometimes, but more often it is a matter of minutes or hours where I'm like evaluating the story. What was my part? How could James been offended or hurt by what I said? He's not wrong. He's not dumb. He's not out to screw me. I did have a role in this. What was the role? Okay, I like James. He's a good guy. James, I'm sorry. My actions were the following, and that was not my best self. I'm sorry for that.
I love the personification of the different elements of ourselves. I sometimes view it like the Game of Thrones. Like in my mind, there's one throne, but so many different people sit on it. Sometimes it's a 3-year-old version of me, and like he's just like lopping heads and driving the car all over someone's lawn, right? And it's just chaos. And then we got to get him off and put like a more refined version. What do you do on a daily basis to prime yourself or stack the odds that you're going to be able to live in positive intelligence during the day? Do you have like a morning ritual or
Yeah.
what are the things that you have put in place to help you with that?
The reason I pause there for a moment is because there's been, and let's just use the start of positive intelligence as the starting point for these rituals over the past 4 years. When I was first introduced to positive intelligence, I was a prolific practitioner, which meant every morning I'd wake up, I'd listen to a lesson in PQ, I'd do some meditation, some mindfulness exercises, and I usually do that for 10 or 15 minutes in the morning. Quite frankly, I don't do that quite as often anymore. Throughout those years, there have been some moments in life where I've gone in my basement and either stretched for 20 minutes, which had a soothing element to it. There were some other moments where I would sit in this wonderful rocking chair and put on some classical music. I have a record player now and some classical records, and I'd listen to the classical and just kind of zone out for a moment. Other times, I sit in the familiar spot on the couch and drink my coffee and pet the dog and listen to the sounds of the house and maybe do some emails. But truthfully I don't really have a daily ritual per se, but I can say that for me, the reason PQ, positive intelligence, is synonymous, is that it is so ingrained in the way I see the world now that when stuff happens to me, there is an objective thought I wonder why this is happening. Why did this bad thing happen? Is it just happenstance, or is there something I need to learn from it? So that type of narrative is just ingrained now, where in the past it'd be like, James is out to screw me, the world's out to screw me, I'm always like woe is me stuff. So I think maybe the daily ritual is leaning into the core lessons of positive intelligence and continuing to look at the world that way, even though I'm not doing the daily meditation or mindfulness exercises or have a daily ritual per se.
I see. I was reading a book years ago by Marissa Peer. She's a psychotherapist out of the UK, and she has a lot of content online. But one of the things she talked about was in line with this. In other words, we're always judging ourselves. We're always critical. And there's a piece of that helps us grow, right? Like what can be better. But she talked about the importance of praise and praising self, and not for stuff that you're not, but actually like who you are, things you've done in the past. And I remember reading that thinking, that's a great idea. I probably don't do that. No, I know I don't do that. And so I remember I just created an alarm on my phone twice a day. And I was like, I'm going to just create this ritual for a while. And I did that probably for a month. And I do remember during that time, like it elevated my mood. And I was shocked actually how powerful that was. It just made my life more positive. And I look back now because I was listening more to a different side versus the critic and the judge. So I understand what you say when you're like, I did something for a while. I don't do it now, but it's because you got the bump from that and you created some new habits, which is fantastic.
Yeah. Can I interject with one thing?
Of course.
Along the lines of the positive reinforcement, one of the biggest lessons for me is to give myself grace. Right? I'm a human. I'm flawed. I make mistakes. A lot of us beat ourselves up for the mistakes. A lot of us lay awake at night replaying a story. I wish I would have said this. I can't believe I did that. It's done. We've already done it. Right? So it's not to suggest we just put on rose-colored glasses and accept the world as it is. And whatever, I stepped all over James. No problem. Who cares? But it's more about like, I took that action. I'm a human. Let me learn from it. What am I unproud of? What might I do differently in the next time? And you know what? You're okay. Forgive yourself. You would forgive other people if they wronged you. Forgive yourself for wronging yourself and others. And that giving myself grace was tremendous.
Yeah, that's such a great point. Which is silencing the judge by giving yourself grace for sure. Well, the last thing I want to ask you about before we wrap up is just about the growth mindset. How important is that for us to really reach a next level for us in our own growth?
Man, I think it's as essential as getting to know the voices in our head, in the sense that if we don't think there is room to grow, if I don't think there's anything for me to do differently, if I think all of the world's problems are because of you and not because of me, then what are you going to work on? Like, you're perfect. So I think the growth mindset, again, is an essential piece. my clients are not reaching out to me because they think they're perfect and have nothing to work on, right? The best clients are the ones that, to your point earlier, recognize something within them that is not reaching their fullest capabilities, is holding them back, is not right, right? That's the clue that they've given themselves. And then for those that are willing to look to grow, they act upon that. They look for a coach or a training or a mentor or something, right? And so if you don't have a growth mindset, then I think the counter is you're perfect, you have nothing to work on, or you're unwilling to work on it, in which case, okay, great, go live your life.
We started recently, every corporate client that we work with, like we'll go in and work with the whole company of leaders. And what we started doing was foundational. We would lay down growth mindset, that we would do teaching and training on it. And not that everyone gets it just because they hear you teach a couple classes on it, but it becomes essential for us to call people back to it. So even when we'll have, someone will do a 360 assessment, we'll sit down with them and we'll say, hey, remember we talked about growth mindset? Need you to really step into that right now. And just to pre-frame for them, to keep them out of that ego reactive state. And it's really been powerful, definitely powerful for my own life to try to keep staying in there, because my natural state, I think, is more to go and protect my ego. So as we wrap up, I wanted to ask a little bit about if executives who want to work with you, and what's sort of the ideal situation, like for anyone listening to this. I know you help a lot of different people, but what's kind of that specialty that if you're in this situation or this situation, yes, call me.
It's a hard one to answer because they're multifaceted, right? And you know it too because your clients are multifaceted. I'll tell you what I hear a lot. And one of the things is I'm often not shy to speak up. With a lot of clients that reach out to me, it's not that they're shy to speak up, it's that they don't speak up enough, or they don't speak up enough in what they deem the right way, with common collectiveness, with objectivity, with honesty and candor and vulnerability, right? To make it binary, they either speak up too much or they don't speak up at all. And so what I find is that a lot of times the conversations are starting with, in essence, I don't know what to say in these situations, how to delegate, how to engage in conflict, how to tell my colleagues they're not holding their end of the bargain, how to tell investors or stakeholders of the board X, Y, or Z. And so the stories go wide, but I guess the top of the umbrella is not an inability, that's wrong, but maybe a lack of confidence in how to speak up in their voice, so they feel like they've said their piece in the way that they wanted to say it.
And how do people get a hold of you?
I am the only Darren Kanthal on LinkedIn. So I do have that distinction, which is cool. That's an easy way. Our company is thekanthalgroup.com. We're going through a bit of a facelift, so that'll be here in a couple months. But those are the two best ways, my website and from LinkedIn.
Fantastic. And all of that information I'll have in the show notes, as well as a summary of what we talked about here today. Hey, Darren, thanks for making some time for us. And one of the things I appreciate about you, well, there's a couple of things I appreciate about you I want to end with. Number one, I love your story in that you were in this world of HR, going through these loops and realizing, hey, something's got to change, and you reached out and you got to coach yourself back then, and that puts you on a different trajectory. Secondly, it takes a lot of courage, not only to look inward, but then to take risks and go into some other lane, which you've done. And the last thing I'll mention is that, you continue to serve. You put some great content on LinkedIn. I enjoy reading it. It's definitely like straight to the point, calls people out. So I love that there's some teeth in your content. I think that's great. And I just appreciate that we've made this connection. So again, thanks so much for making the time today, and look forward to talking to you again.
James, let me pass some to you as well. I'm a fellow podcast host. I've recorded all of 5, and it was really good to be on the receiving end with you in the driver's seat. You did a great job, asked good questions, you recap well, like a lot for me to learn from. I find inspiration in confidence, and you present confidently. And I think that's a great skill of yours. I think it's a value prop that you've got. So I appreciate you. Thank you for giving me the opportunity and showing up as you. That was great.
Awesome. Fantastic, Darren. Thanks for being here.
All right. Thank you.